Do our senses provide an accurate representation of reality? At first glance, the answer seems obvious, perhaps making this persuasive argument a more difficult task based on the examples presented in the class. Take the illusions, like the checkerboard squares that appear to be different colors, even though they are the same, reflecting identical wavelengths of light, suggesting that perception can indeed mislead us. Biases also seem to distort reality. For example, when you're expecting an Amazon delivery, you might hear a doorbell through the noise of a running shower, something you might otherwise miss. And then there are the failures of attention, where observers counting basketball passes fail to notice a person in a gorilla suit walking through the middle of the scene. Lecture and Wolfe et al., 2020, pages 243. Taken together, these examples, illusion, bias, and inattentional blindness, on the surface seems to suggest that perception is flawed. But what if these apparent errors actually reveal something deeper? Not that our senses are broken, but that a perception is a highly optimized system, processing a vast amount of information in order to detect and interpret the complex world around us. A continuous dynamic system, constantly balancing efficiency and accuracy, intuition and reasoning, an evolutionary process shaped by one simple goal: survival. And survival depends on the adaptive alignment between a constantly changing objective reality and our subjective experience of it. To understand this, we began with sensation, the process of converting physical energy, like light and sound waves, into neural signals, and perception, the brain's interpretation of those signals. Wolfe et al., 2020, pages 1 through 3. Research in psychophysics shows that perception is not random. It follows precise, measurable laws. Wolfe et al., 2020, pages 7 and 8. Weber's law demonstrates that we detect changes in stimuli based on consistent ratios, known as just noticeable differences, or JNDs. Wolfe et al., 2020, pages 8 and 9. For example, a heavier barbell requires a predictable larger increase in weight than a lighter one for the difference to be noticeable. Building on this, Fechner's law shows that perceived intensity scales predictably with physical input, typically in a logarithmic relationship within normal sensory ranges. Wolfe et al., 2020, pages 8 and 9. At more extreme levels of stimulation, Stevens-Powers' law provides a more accurate model, showing that perception can scale non-linearly depending on the type of stimulus. Wolfe et al., 2020, page 10. Together, these laws suggest something important. The mind and the physical world are systematically related, but our mental representations are neither exact copies of the reality nor random guesses. They are calibrated at any given moment in space and time to an objective world. However, perception is not just about detecting the world, it's about interpreting it. The philosopher Plato illustrated this in his Allegory of the Cave, Plato 2008. In this story, prisoners are chained inside a cave, able to see only shadows cast on the wall. These shadows, produced by objects passing in front of a fire behind them, become their entire reality. Having never seen the outside world, they mistake these projections for the truth itself. When one prisoner is freed and encounters the real objects, and eventually the world beyond the cave, he realizes that what he once perceived as reality was only a representation. The prisoner's sensory input was not arbitrary, it was systematically related to reality, but the mismatch lay in the interpretation. Plato extended this idea through his concept of forms, ideal, abstract representations that exist beyond our immediate sensory experience. Plato 2008. Consider something as simple as an apple sitting in a fruit bowl on a table. The apple exists independently of our consciousness, an object in the physical world, consisting of matter and interacting with our sensory systems through light scattering off its surface that makes it visible, while its chemical composition gives rise to its smell, texture, and taste. But perceptually, it becomes something more, a recognizable object, a memory, a preference. So how do these two aspects, the physical object and our internal experience, combine into a single perceptual state? We can think of this as a perceptual wave model, where objective reality and subjective experience come together and into a unified perceptual state. It might be stated in a wave equation such as psi is equal to cosine of theta plus I sine theta. The cosine component represents objective reality, the physical signals detected by our senses. The imaginary sine component represents subjective experience, our thoughts, feelings, and the actions we imagine before we take them. And it is these imagined actions that ultimately manifest from the possibilities within their vast psychophysical Hilbert space into real behavior. Together, they form a unified perceptual state, not just what is out there, but what it means to us and how we will interact with it. And this perceptual state does not stop at awareness. It drives action. We can think of this as a loop with three components. The affective component, I like apples, or I don't. The cognitive component, apples are healthy, or I know I'm allergic to them. And a behavioral component, I eat the apple, or I don't. Through behavior, perception ultimately feeds back from the imaginary into the real physical world. The apple disappears from the bowl, eaten, or it sits for weeks, eventually rotting. Perception shapes the environments that we live in. In this way, perception does more than represent reality, it helps to create it. So do our senses accurately represent reality? Yes, our sensory systems provide a reliable, predictable representation of the physical world. But it is through subjective interpretation and behavior that reality takes on meaning and is ultimately transformed.
The proof, you ask. You are the proof that your senses accurately represent reality. The very fact that you exist and are watching this video, photons scattering off your screen, sound waves reaching your ears, energy, transduced and interpreted, becoming meaning in your mind, organisms whose senses weren't up to snuff, already cease to exist.